everyone, and welcome to FanCam. This is our second episode already, and I want to introduce you to one of my pretty much lifelong friends, Calvin Wright from the ProFFet Podcast. I got that right?
Yes, the ProFFet Podcast.
There we go. And I swear, this is going to be a really cool episode because you're a bit of an unconventional fan from what my viewers would probably think. Would you mind telling us what it is you do?
Well, so first of all, I love football, NFL especially. I like college, but NFL is more interesting to me. But I more than actual individual NFL games, I'm more interested in the fantasy football aspect, which fantasy football, some of you have heard of it, I'm sure, but some of you may not because it's still pretty new, but it's exploded in popularity over the past couple years. It was getting big, but from like 2010 to now, this past decade, it's exploded with over like millions of users using fantasy football during the season as a source of entertainment and now income for a lot of people.
Really?
There's a lot of ways you can make money, and especially now they've basically legalized gambling with it. So that's one way. But yeah, there's a lot of money involved in the fantasy football industry now, which is crazy because 10 years ago, fantasy football and industry, those weren't a combination of words you'd ever hear.
Exactly.
It's a booming thing right now. So yeah, I'm very interested in fantasy football. I've been playing for, I think this is my 11th year. You were actually in the first league I was
in. I remember I'm sitting here thinking, wait, we could have been playing with money when we were kids? What?
Yeah, we could have. You had Peyton Manning, I remember.
Yes, it was great.
For him every single week.
No, I held on. I still have the championship ring you guys sent in the mail. It is still in my jewelry box in my bedroom. So that was some fun times. But now, I mean, monetizing fantasy football, that is cool.
Monetizing. It's funny you say the ring, the fantasy football ring, because when we did that, we wanted like a ring to celebrate like they have in real life. And I think we ended up like going to Dillard's or something to find some cheap jewelry ring.
Yeah.
Now there are websites and shops for the sole purpose of fantasy football trophies, and the trophies can run upwards of $500 for a trophy. We've got champion. It's crazy, but yeah, and that's all within the past, since we started back about 10 years ago.
Wow. So yeah, now anyone who's listening, I have a feeling their ears perked up. They're like, excuse me, this is more than just NFL.com sort of whatever it is.
There's so many different ways to play and different styles of games. Yeah, so it's a lot of fun.
And with you, I know you follow the NFL as a whole, but you have a couple of teams that you root for that I know of. Which ones are you a big fan of? If your Green Bay Packers helmet in the background doesn't give it away.
Well, I officially have no bias since I've been playing so long. There's no players that I favor, but I was born in Green Bay, Wisconsin, so I have to be a Packers fan, not really an option. And then I also cheer for the Arizona Cardinals. A big fan of some of their players. I interviewed one of their players, Andy Isabella, on my podcast. So like, choice to be a fan.
Yeah.
So I also tend to cheer for the Jets, and this sounds silly, but I think they have really good uniforms. Their colors, I love their colors.
It looks good.
I like their jerseys, and they've got a few players that I really like. They've got a rookie wide receiver. So, but Cardinals and Packers are my main favorite teams.
Nice. And so you've been doing basically NFL, fantasy football, being a fan of football. Do you work with anyone? You mentioned that you interviewed a player. Where can people find that interview? Because I'm sure some of these people who are watching the stream right now are football fans.
Yeah, so my main page started 2 years or 3 years ago, something like that. Hard to keep track of. It was on Instagram. It was an Instagram page where I'd like make some graphic and then write an article, and I'd post it, and like 3 people would like it.
Loyal fans.
And I kept doing it. I just kept doing it, even though it wasn't going anywhere. And over time on Instagram, just a couple of weeks ago, I hit 3,000 followers. And then on TikTok, I started doing the TikToks with the video and everything, the video production. I started doing that. It would have been end of May, late May, so almost June. and I've been doing that pretty consistently every day. And on that, I've got over 10,000 followers. So that's definitely now my main page is the TikTok, which isn't what I expected at the beginning of this year. But yeah,
Yeah.
TikTok would be the best place to find me, followed by Instagram. And then I also try to do some stuff on YouTube, but I don't use YouTube as much, but I do some live streams on it. And then I also have the podcast, of course, the podcast.
So you guys can find Calvin anywhere, pretty much. So that's awesome. And so I want to go back to beginning with fantasy football. If someone thinks that sounds pretty cool, if they've never really been a part of fantasy football, can you describe what it is and how to get into it?
All right. So imagine you have a football team with Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback, Christian McCaffrey as your running back, and Julio Jones as your wide receiver.
That sounds like I just won a Super Bowl.
Yeah, it sounds like a dream, but it's not a dream. It's a fantasy. Opener. It's a fantasy. No, but so basically fantasy football is you and your friends or strangers. You make fake football teams, and at the beginning of the season, there's a draft where you all take turns selecting or drafting real NFL players onto your roster. And you would normally have a quarterback, a couple wide receivers, a couple running backs, a tight end, and then you would select a defense and a kicker, stuff like that. And then you'd have a bench of players in case someone gets injured, which happens a lot.
Yeah.
Then week to week, you would start them, put players in your starting or bench lineup, depending on matchups and just kind of how you think they're going to do that week. And then as the players perform in real life, they earn fantasy points based off their real life performance. So a touchdown, they'd get 6 points, a 25-yard pass, you'd get 1 point, stuff like that. And at the end of the week, the scores are tallied up and you either win or lose. And so that's really the basis of how fantasy football works. There are a lot of like weird spin-off games. There's daily fantasy where you like redraft a team every single week. There are leagues where you have like 20 teams, and at the end of each week, the lowest scorer is kicked out of the league. So a lot of different.
Oh, wow.
They've got ones where like to trade, you have to pay money, and then the money goes to a jackpot, stuff like that. So there are a lot of different spin-off games, but the main idea is the same for all of them, that you draft players and then you earn points based on how they play in real life.
Now, I know there's a couple of different websites out there. Is there one main one that's just pretty easy to use, or is there one that's a little more difficult for advanced people? What's the level like?
So this is a debate between everyone who plays, like what is the best website? NFL.com is a popular one, of course, NFL. They've got, in many opinions, the best website, but their app is horrible. Their app is almost non-usable, but they've got a really good website. Then you've got ESPN and Yahoo. Those are two popular ones as well. They're kind of known as jack of all trades, decent app, decent website. And then there's a new one that specializes in just the app, basically, which is called sleeper.com. That's what a lot of people are using nowadays, past couple of years. It's transitioned to that because they have a decent website, but the app is amazing. And people are on their phones all the time, much more than a desktop computer. So Sleeper is my personal favorite.
Nice. And do all of these involve using money? Can you do them for free like we used to, or do you have to put something in?
Yeah, so you can obviously do them for free. Yeah, so a lot of people wouldn't play if they had to put in money. The money, it adds a couple features in that obviously someone gets money, but also since there's that money in the jackpot, if someone's doing poorly, there's an incentive for them not just to quit halfway through the season.
Oh, good point. Yeah, I know that happened in our league.
Yeah. We should have played for money. That wouldn't have been a problem.
Yeah, 12-year-olds, all the money they have.
And also another incentive that is used a lot to keep people from playing, even if they're out of playoff contention or whatever, is a loser punishment. So it'd be something like if you come in last place, you have to do something really embarrassing. A popular one is you have to retake the ACT to see what you get nowadays. Stuff like that.
Now that's just downright torture.
Yeah. So that's we wouldn't have had our problem if we had money and punishment.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. That's incredible. This is really, like you said, the past few years, it sounds like it's gotten really big.
Yeah, I mean ESPN, CBS Sports, they've got whole TV shows dedicated to just the fantasy aspect of football, and it's an industry that didn't really exist in mainstream settings until recently.
And now with COVID, I mean, you may or may not know this, but how do you think that's going to impact fantasy football going forward?
So the COVID is interesting because there are a lot of conflicting ideas about how sports should operate. If you've been following NFL or no, not NFL, NHL and NBA, they've gone with more a bubble technique, especially NBA, where the players are completely isolated. I think they're at Disney World and I
Yeah.
mean bubble. And
Interesting.
it worked very well for them in terms of COVID, but I know they didn't restart with all the teams, and there's smaller teams in basketball. 5 starters. I forget how many
Yeah.
people are on roster, but it's like 15. Whereas NFL, you've got 50 plus
Yeah.
people, coaches, all that. So it's going to be hard for the NFL. But one big thing that just happened, I think it was MLB, the acronyms.
It's alphabet soup.
Yeah, they're thinking about, and at this time I haven't checked if it's passed, but doing something where if a player tests positive, they only have to sit out 10 days, I believe, is the proposal.
Okay.
Instead of 2 weeks, which would be huge for NFL.
Yeah,
And
especially
you can test positive if you've had it, even if you're no longer contagious. So that's one idea. Honestly, though, NFL, it will be impacted. There are all these precautionary things, but players will get it. And that's going to be a mess for both the NFL and fantasy football. But it opens up whole new strategies in terms of fantasy. If how to draft a team in a way that you could have players, get COVID and still be able to compete.
which
Really interesting.
which player do you think has the best hygiene? Let's draft them. Who's going to wash their hands the most?
It's funny you bring that up. Ezekiel Elliott, starting running back for the Dallas Cowboys. He tested positive for COVID a couple weeks ago.
Oh.
And his average draft position shot up because there's there's the idea that, I mean, we don't know if it's true, but there's a proposed theory that if you get COVID, like you can't get it in that same, next however long, you're immune for a while. So people are trying to target him in drafts because they think he won't get COVID.
That is absolutely insane. This is so nuanced. Like you said, we used to play it, but it was a small scale thing. I never realized just any sort of following players on social media. That must give you huge hints as to who to draft. Or like if someone's saying, "Oh, not feeling all that great," dropped.
There's every once in a while, it seems like there are 2 players every preseason that like there will be a photo leaked of them on Instagram of them working out and like they added 20 pounds of muscle, and the fantasy community like goes gaga over them and everyone drafts them just because they saw these pictures of them working out, and there's like a huge hype train. And then like it never pans out because I guess all athletes look strong when they're working out shirtless.
Yeah.
React to that one picture they see.
So it's best to stay off the hype train and just stick to your guns.
Yeah, in some ways, like following the players' Instagrams and stuff, it can actually be bad for fantasy football because like they'll post stuff like, I'm about to eat this year, this is gonna be a good year, and like you believe it, but they don't like, I mean, them saying that doesn't actually change anything. So it's easy with not to like objectify football players, but it's different if you're seeing them as real people. You're gonna treat how you play them in fantasy, because you're gonna be like, oh, he's a cool guy to the poor kids he gives to them, but that shouldn't affect their fantasy value.
Yeah.
It sounds awful, but
hey, if money's on the line, you got to look at that sort of stuff.
if you're playing for high stakes, you can't let the player being a criminal affect things.
But I was wondering, we've been talking about NFL. Do they have it for college football too, or like even the XFL? I know it's defunct-ish, potentially coming back, but were there anything involved with that?
So, XFL, there was not a mainstream fantasy platform because, I mean, there wasn't enough time. No one knew anything. And they weren't going to divest a lot of their funds to creating that when they had obviously other worries.
Yeah.
Now, there was an XFL website someone made for fantasy football. Didn't work very well. But for college, it's not as well. It's hard to explain, but there are a couple legal issues that I know that within the past with players, but also it's really hard to structure a league because there's so many teams.
True. Yeah, you have so many colleges.
In NFL, 32 teams. But in, college, there's so many colleges. And if you're playing with scoring based on yardage and touchdowns, you could get someone like a horrible team that no one's ever heard of, but because everyone else is bad, he gets a ton of points. So it would be really difficult. So there are alternate websites that do that, but there aren't like official ones really.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You could get someone playing like Valparaiso University in Northwest Indiana because I went there and I can trash on their team. If you got Michigan playing them, you're done.
Yeah, so it'd be like you can own like the best players in the nation and lose to people just because they're in like a really weak. Yeah, so it's not quite the same.
So sticking with professional sports, we have the NFL covered. You got NBA, NHL, MLB, like I said, alphabet soup. Do you branch out into any of those for fantasy?
So there is fantasy for MLB and basketball and hockey. I don't personally do them. I've tried, and a pretty common, idea about it is it just doesn't work as well because there's so many games. So many games.
True.
One of the reasons the NFL works so well for fantasy is the games are Sunday, basically. Sunday afternoon is the game. And then you have all week to prepare to start your players. And then it's Sunday, a game on Monday and Thursday, but it's different. Whereas NBA, you got matchups going the whole weekend. So you have to like start your team for the week. So it doesn't work as well. And it's nowhere near as popular just because the format, it doesn't work as well.
It sounds like that would take up a lot more time too.
Yeah, to be good at, and well, I don't know, time, it's not as good, especially MLB because they're like 180 games.
Oh yeah.
They have to break it down in like starting your team every week but then you don't feel like checking it. It doesn't work as well.
You don't get that adrenaline rush of, oh, I'm watching one football game. Let me check on my player. Oh my gosh, 32 points.
Yeah, and that's I think one of the reasons NFL's been so successful. Well, NBA's TV ratings are pretty bad in the past couple of years in terms of what they were a while ago. But NFL, you've got the structure of Sunday afternoon to most people's NFL. Monday night is, the football game. Whereas other sports, it's just kind of constant throughout the weekend. It's way harder to sit down and watch.
That's a really good point.
Every NBA team.
Yeah.
It's different.
Exactly. Yeah. And, most people you have football ingrained in holidays. You have Thanksgiving. You have all of that. And for most people, even if you don't watch the NFL, you find yourself watching the NFL that day.
Yeah. Even friends I have who don't watch any football, like Thanksgiving, their family turns on the Lions losing to someone.
Well, yes.
Those, it's very ingrained in culture.
There's nothing quite like Thanksgiving and the Lions losing.
Yeah, Super Bowl parties, are very mainstream even for people who don't watch football regularly.
Now, I have to do a slight side tangent because you mentioned the Lions. I'm from Michigan. Anyone who watches knows that. I can say this. I want the Lions gone. I want them replaced with the Kalamazoo Kangaroos, and that is my final stance on the matter. I think that would be great. But
they can't be worse.
Yeah, exactly. You could just switch out Western Michigan University, pop them in the NFL. They'll still have the same 0-19 whatever record. But yeah, okay. So I have to think a lot of people who are watching might not know a lot about NFL, might know a little bit, kind of like me, watch a few teams, have your favorites. Can they still be active in fantasy? Do you have to be a scholar of it, a big fan of it in order to have fun with it?
So that's where the ProFFet would come in.
Hey, here's the plug.
There are a lot of other pages, better or worse, that
You're the
do
best.
the kind of same thing. I agree, but there are a lot of other pages that do the same thing, in that we realize that most people don't want to or have the ability to spend, hours researching statistics, watching film, and analyzing each player every week. Most people don't want to or have the time to do that. And what we would do is, do it for you and give the best advice we can. And then you are able to watch or listen to that program and not like do directly what they say, but hear an educated opinion on a player and then kind of act on that. So that's where that comes into play. So most people don't spend as much time as I do. There are a lot who do, but a lot of my followers probably like fantasy football, want to be good at it, but don't have the time to spend hours on it every week.
Now, when you talk about players, you aren't covering every player. You're mostly covering the highlights, right? Because, oh boy, how are you still alive if you're spending that much time awake looking at numbers?
It's a little bit the contrary, actually.
Really?
Surprising sounding, but because here's the thing. You know who Patrick Mahomes is, right?
Yes. Sioux City, there are a lot of Kansas fans, surprisingly.
That's what I was assuming. Yeah. You don't need to watch a video of someone telling you to start Patrick Mahomes or telling you that Patrick Mahomes is good. You don't need that. Everyone knows that. Christian McCaffrey, you know him, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. You don't need a video of someone saying, start Christian McCaffrey. He's going to be good for the 20th game in a row.
Yeah.
So it really is the more midline players that you would be questioning starting. So they're saying start your studs, which your stud players are, the anchors of your team. But the midline guys, the kind of secondary players, that's where it's a lot harder every week because you're actually changing out based on just matchups on who to start. And that's where it gets harder. The players that you may not know as well aren't household names, like Tyler Boyd. Do you know that name?
No.
Yeah, see, those are the guys that we have to talk about. Because, most people who don't watch all the games aren't going to know those names, even though they could be really good. But just based on, not being as good as other players or being on, not as popular teams, they aren't as well known.
Yeah, you get some Lions players that are just surprising occasionally. Everyone
Kenny
else.
Golladay last year, Kenny Golladay, that guy, he's good.
It's incredible.
People saw that coming just because, he wasn't a big name. The Lions, no one watches them.
It's true.
So
not even Michigan people.
Yeah, not even Michigan. So those are more the players, that we would talk about, kind of the midline guys.
Yeah. So you're talking about individual players, not so much whole teams just going and destroying like the Browns or something. It's more of a very nuanced bit of information.
Yeah, because if you say, so I'm trying to think of an example. Let's say the Browns, back, a couple of years ago, the worst team, right?
Yeah. No, not just a couple years ago.
Here's where what we would call in the industry game script comes in.
Oh.
So let's say you've got a wide receiver going against the Cleveland Browns. You're going to say, oh, that's, he's going to do well. That's the worst team. But what you aren't thinking about is the team your wide receiver on, they're going to score a couple touchdowns early on, have a lead, and they're going to stop throwing the ball. And suddenly you're just going to run out the clock, play conservatively, just kind of run it out. And that's why you would play the running back, but you may want to steer away from the wide receiver. Now you would look at red zone statistics to see if those early touchdowns are going to go to him or if you should opt for a different player.
This is incredible. I like that. Being a meteorologist, numbers are pretty much my life. I had no idea that you could go that deep into NFL. And wow.
Oh yeah, some of the services, the statistics get so deep. They're mostly paid services, so I have a couple
Mhm.
where I'm paying like $200 a year for statistics services. So
Dang.
like they've got things on how many yards did a player on average travel when running before he was like hit the first time to see are they really good or is it the offensive line that's blocking really well?
Oh.
That you can see red zone reception, stuff like that, and say, oh, okay, the quarterback targets him when they get in the end zone. He's a safer play, stuff like that. So, yeah, the statistics go deep.
Wow.
They didn't have these services that long ago when we started, a lot of them, because the industry hadn't been around long enough that there wasn't crews of people who their job is to take these statistics. So even on these ones, the years, they only go back to like a couple. It doesn't go back all the way.
Wow. All right. So the longer we go with this, the more you're going to have to work with, and then that's going to get real fun.
And the more sample sizes you'd get. So one of the problems people have is called recency bias. So it'd be like last year, a rookie running back exploded and was the best running back in the league. Let's say that happens.
Mhm.
The next year, people are going to assume that's going to happen again and try to target the rookie running back who's going to explode. Whereas if you look at the past 20 years, it's rare that that happens. So that's where a lot of newer players who've only been playing for a couple years fall into the kind of the trap of expecting what happened last year to happen again, just with different players.
That is, I am very much interested in this again. You have completely revitalized my want to be on a football league again. Oh my God. I love it. Well, if you have anyone out there, anyone who's watching, if you want to try this, starting up, you mentioned you have NFL.com, you have ESPN, which, household names. For a beginner, which service would you recommend or steer people towards the most?
Which service?
Yeah.
I would say the easiest right now would be like sleeper.com. You
All
can look
right.
it up on your phone, Sleeper, just because it's on your phone mostly,
Mm.
which everyone always has their phone. And
Oh,
they
yeah.
have the fastest alerts for injuries and stuff.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, there you guys go. And then for the analytics, for someone who knows all, how can they follow you?
So you can follow me on any social media, basically, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, any podcast services, just the ProFFet, one word with two F's. The two F's stand for fantasy football. You can find me in all those.
Awesome. And we'll put the links in the description. I really recommend it. Calvin, it's always great to have you on and just see you because, we grew up together. But I think if you start a low budget fantasy league this year, you know my number. I don't trust myself.
You got to be careful. They found a couple years ago that the average fantasy football player spends 6.9 hours at work a week working on their fantasy team. So it's caused people trouble in the workplace.
Oh, it's a good thing my coworkers don't watch this. Oh my gosh.
It can be a bit addicting.
Well, you know what? I think I'm going to jump on board with that, especially, COVID. I need something to do, and this sounds like it. And I have an inside man, so get all the stats. Awesome. Well, thank you again for being on. Thank you all for watching out there in YouTube space. And we'll be back again soon with more FanCam. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me.